Welcome to the Paycheck Paradox. Today we'll uncover why your gross pay might be dropping even as your hours climb, and what immediate steps you can take to protect your wages. Let's get started. Here is our agenda. First, we will identify the red flag that signals a paycheck problem. Next, we will decode your payslip. Then, we will clarify overtime math. After that, we will move to action steps for accountability. We will also cover common pitfalls, summarize key takeaways, and test your understanding with quick quizzes. Let's move on. Disclaimer: this video is for educational purposes only and is not legal or financial advice. Overtime rules and payroll regulations vary by jurisdiction and employer policy. If you suspect underpayment, consult a qualified professional or contact your local labor agency. Now, with that in mind, let's proceed. The primary red flag is a noticeable drop in gross pay at the same time your hours increase, especially when you are working overtime. That combination is not normal and should trigger an immediate, thorough review. Let's transition into how to decode your payslip to pinpoint the issue. To decode your payslip, start in the earnings section. Compare regular hours against overtime hours. Verify that the overtime rate is at least 1.5 times your regular rate. Next, confirm that hours are allocated by each workweek, not just summed for a biweekly period. Finally, review scheduled pre-tax deductions, such as health insurance or retirement contributions, noting that some are only taken on specific checks and should not drastically reduce a high-hour check's gross pay. Now let's break down overtime math with a concrete example. Here is a practical audit process. First, gather your last 3 to 6 pay stubs and matching timesheets. Second, list your hourly rate and confirm the overtime multiplier, typically 1.5 times. Third, split hours by distinct workweeks. Fourth, compute your expected gross pay using regular hours times the base rate, plus overtime hours times 1.5 times the base rate. Fifth, compare your calculation to the gross pay shown. Sixth, identify any scheduled pre-tax deductions and their timing. Finally, if the numbers do not align, formally request a written, itemized explanation from payroll. Next, we will visualize why weekly allocation matters. This timeline illustrates a bi-weekly pay period divided into 2 work weeks. Week 1 shows 43 hours, of which 3 hours exceed the 40-hour threshold and count as overtime. Week 2 shows 37 hours, and therefore no overtime. The key point is that overtime eligibility resets every work week, not across the entire biweekly total. This demonstrates why 80 total hours can still produce only 3 overtime hours when the overage occurs in a single week. Next, let's quantify the hours distribution with a simple chart. Overtime is evaluated per 40-hour workweek. In our example, 80 total hours are split into week 1 at 43 hours and week 2 at 37 hours. That yields 3 overtime hours only in week 1. The expected gross equals 40 times the base rate, plus 3 times the base rate times 1.5, plus 37 times the base rate. If your gross pay falls sharply below this result, you should suspect hour misallocation across weeks or misclassification of overtime as regular time. Now let's test your understanding with a quick quiz. Quiz time. You worked 82 hours in a bi-weekly period, with 41 hours in week 1 and 41 hours in week 2. How many overtime hours should you guess? Option A, 0 hours. Option B, 2 hours. Option C, 1 hour in week 1 only. Option D, 2 hours, 1 per week. You may pause the video now to think about the answer. We will discuss the answer in the next section of the video. The correct answer is 2 hours, 1 per week. Because overtime eligibility is determined per work week, going 1 hour over in both weeks earns 1 overtime hour in each week. On the left is gross pay, which is the amount before taxes and deductions. It should accurately reflect regular hours plus overtime at the proper rates. Some pre-tax deductions occur only on certain checks, which can change the gross on those checks, but not to an extent that contradicts the correct overtime math. On the right is net pay, which is the take-home amount after taxes and deductions and will fluctuate due to withholding and benefits. Importantly, variability in net pay does not excuse incorrect gross calculations. Next, let's summarize overtime eligibility rules in a compact table. This table summarizes common overtime scenarios. Even split at 40, and 40 yields 0 overtime. A front-loaded case with 43 then 37 yields 3 overtime hours in week 1. When both weeks are 41, that is 2 overtime hours, 1 in each week. If the first week is under and the second week is 45, there are 5 overtime hours in week 2. With that foundation, let's shift into accountability steps you can take right now. For accountability, use independent payroll calculators to estimate your expected gross. Request a written, itemized explanation from payroll for any discrepancy, and ask for a corrected payslip if an error is confirmed. If resolution stalls, escalate through payroll, then human resources, then compliance, and finally to your local labor agency as needed. Document all interactions, including dates, names, screenshots, and your calculations. If you encounter retaliation or refusal, consider seeking legal guidance promptly. Before we proceed, let's take another quick quiz. Here is another question. You worked 80 hours total, with 45 hours in week 1 and 35 hours in week 2. How many overtime hours should be paid? Option A, 0 hours. Option B, 5 hours. Option C, 10 hours. Option D, it depends on biweekly totals only. You may pause the video now to think about the answer. We will discuss the answer in the next section of the video. The correct answer is 5 hours. Because overtime is calculated weekly, week 1 has 5 overtime hours and week 2 has none. Let's highlight common pitfalls that can hide underpayment or cause confusion. Then we will provide key takeaways to keep you protected. Watch for these errors: hours misallocated across the pay period rather than by workweek, overtime classified as regular hours, incorrect overtime multipliers or base rates, timesheet edits or rounding that reduce a week below 40 hours, irregular pre-tax deductions misinterpreted as wage changes, and compensatory time used instead of paid overtime where that is not permitted in private sector contexts. Regulations vary by jurisdiction, so verify your local rules. Now let's cement the essentials with key takeaways. Key takeaways. First, overtime is based on the weekly threshold, not the biweekly total. Second, gross pay must reflect correct regular and overtime calculations. Third, you are entitled to a written, itemized explanation of discrepancies. Finally, escalate methodically if issues remain unresolved to protect your wages. Next, we will summarize the entire process. In summary, watch for the red flag of increasing hours with decreasing gross pay. Decode your payslip by verifying regular versus overtime hours, weekly allocations, and scheduled deductions. Recalculate expected gross and compare it with independent calculators. Demand a written explanation and escalate if needed. Document everything and seek professional assistance where appropriate. Finally, let's close with a thank you and a quick call to action. Thank you for watching. If this video helped you protect your paycheck, please like the video, share it with a coworker who might need it, and subscribe for more wage guidance. In the comments, tell us what part of the payslip confuses you most, or what worked when you challenged a discrepancy. Your experience could help someone else.